There we go. Mm-hmm.
All right, should we give you just another couple minutes, 12:01? You guys want to give it maybe 2-3 more minutes?
Yeah, a couple more minutes.
Excellent.
I mean, we are recording it, so if anybody joins late or can't make it today, as soon as I get my act together and get it posted on the Vermont Landlords Association YouTube channel, it will be available up there, as are all of our prior ones as well. So.
All right. So Angela, while we're just waiting for a couple more people, any flash big updates in the last 2-3 days pertaining to landlords that we should be a bit, aware of? Anything with COVID, VRAP?
So a couple of VRAP type updates. If folks weren't aware, the system has fully launched for other expenses related to housing. And one of the things that's covered in the other expenses related to housing is if there are repairs or other issues with the unit that are going to cost money. So something like bed bug eradication. If a landlord has a bed bug situation in a property and they have one unit in that building that's qualified for VRAP, they can get their treatments covered up to $30,000 for that building. So that also applies to other things, like if there's some sort of habitability issue or some other repair issue that needs to be taken care of. There's now a process to get approval and get payment for those items through VRAP. So
almost makes you want to go out and get bed bugs.
Well,
almost.
Probably wouldn't go that far, but just, saying there is now an avenue to get for landlords to get reimbursed for some of these things. So that's new. The other thing that's been newly added to the VRAP portal on the landlord side is that there's now a process for landlords to be able to ask permission for rent increases. So if you have an unanticipated expense or a property tax bill goes up or some other issue that would cause you to need to raise the rent, there's a process now you can go through to ask to be able to do that, even if you're receiving VRAP funds. So.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, then maybe at 12:04, we've had a bunch of people join on, and I'm sure we're going to have a couple more. So first and foremost, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first landlord informational seminar that we're doing this year. I can't stress enough, our good friends and much appreciated advocate, Angela Zakowski, is an amazing resource to everybody on this call. Be a real estate agent, property manager, property owner. My name is Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Keller Williams Vermont, Strong Will Real Estate Team at Keller Williams Vermont, as well as Strong Will Property Management. Today's session is probably going to be a lot more back and forth than we've done in the past. We've got a team member of the Strong Will Property Management. He's our property manager. We're going to be talking about best practices, fail forwards, as I call them, which is when you make a fail and you learn and you grow from it, implement for betterment. We're also going to be talking about changes in the renter rebates forms. So we encourage everybody, please use the Q&A so we can make this as absolutely participatory as possible. Anybody who knows me knows I can ramble forever. That's not why you guys are here. We're here to grow and to learn. And with that being said, Angela, before we put Dan on the spot, anything you'd like to say, or any thing that you'd like to update our members and our valued participants?
I think pay a lot of attention to what's going on sort of in the legislature. I think we are going to see some rapid fire housing bills shooting through. There's the Burlington Just Cause that we're monitoring, but I also anticipate the registry and inspection bill, housing investment. There's going to be some movement on a lot of housing bills this session. So, keep an eye on our website, keep an eye on Digger. If you don't read Vermont Digger, I would highly recommend it. That's where a lot of the political and legislative stuff is. And that's a good place to get some information. So.
Excellent. Well, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan Hogan, who's the property manager for Strong Will Property Management. We've worked with Dan it seems like only yesterday, what is it, 4 or 5 years now?
Yep.
Dan manages over 100 units, including some small condo associations on top of that. 28 of those units are owned by me personally. And he's really our, for lack of a better phrase, tip of the spear. And one thing I'd like to congratulate Dan on and thank Angela with as well is we had an extremely low amount of non-payers during COVID. And I think it was because of Dan's approach of really being forward in communication, asking people to let us know if they're in trouble, providing them information as preemptively as we could about VRAP funds, so that both for our clients as well as for, very importantly, our residents. The other thing that Dan just instrumented this week is we're actually going to do our maintenance tech is we're going to try to do random acts of kindness to our residents, meaning that if we happen to know 1 or 2 tenants that's struggling more than others, put a random box of groceries on their, on their box once, on their doorstep once a month, just to really try to show our residents we care. So it's much more reciprocal relationship than a standard, just send me the rent. So Dan, starting off today, if you could help somebody learn from all our mistakes, what do you think are the biggest 3 mistakes we made in the last few years? And what did we learn from them? And how would you suggest anybody, property owner or other manager or real estate agent, learn from those 3 mistakes?
I'd have to say kind of one of the biggest things, like Brian said, with our tenants going through the whole pandemic and everything, it's been communication. That's probably our key obligation as property managers. Might be something that people tend to struggle with. Staying in contact with their tenants, hearing them out, seeing what's going on, rather than that just pay rent, you live here, you pay rent, that's about it. We do kind of take an approach to know our tenants by name, number one, how many we have. I think that's important, and people kind of appreciate that too. They can call me anytime. I try to stay as available as possible. We have a whole team that really focuses on communication as our paramount number one thing. That's kind of the biggest thing. And the biggest success factor that we've had throughout this past year. It's been difficult, but it's been communication. So I don't know if there's 3 things, but there's one big thing. That's about it for that.
Dan, if you might, one of the common things that, and I know that when I self-managed, and I sleep at night thanks to you, Dan. But when I self-manage, the art of tenant selection, how to be responsible, how to respect fair housing, as well as how to get past everything from the glorious recommendations, which you question, to, tips, tricks. Is it, talk to us a little bit about the tenant selection process that you go through that you believe helps you select better community members for us.
Yeah, so our screening process goes a few layers deep. It's, number one, kind of finding those people that will fit that success rate and kind of like how you've learned over the years. I mean, we rent apartments every day. We constantly have listings. We add new ones all the time too, but really it's finding those people that will be successful, that qualify on certain earmarks, that have proven successful for us, and people that live there not just for a year but multiple years, hopefully. So I mean, the first thing in our screening process is references, obviously landlord references, personal references. Sometimes you can take references with a grain of salt. You do take that information, and try to connect with that landlord too. There are certain things that they can share and cannot. So we've kind of boiled it down to some standard questions that, did they receive their deposit back, things like that. Nature, did they give you ample proper notice before they moved out, just so you can kind of anticipate the what's to come when it's time for them to move out for you. But because that's kind of one thing landlords fear a lot, is people just dropping out, leaving, not giving notice or anything like that. So that's where you kind of get in scramble mode, and that can be a poor situation. But another one is background and credit screenings. We do that for all potentials, applicants, potential renters over 18 that are going to be living in the house and on the lease. We utilize property management software that gives us access to those things, and can be, one of the bigger benefits to having a property manager is that we have access to those types of reports, where it gives you a full credit history. It does, national background check and state level. So you can get a lot of insight on that. As property managers, we are obligated to protect that information. So if say somebody hired me to do a leasing service, we could share, I guess, some information, but we can't give them an actual copy of the report or anything like that. I've had kind of owners ask for that in the past, but we ourselves have to go through a screening process to get access to those things, so we can help other owners have successful tenants. Some other things we do on the state level, an additional thing we do is a Vermont court search. We some of that is free, but we do pay for access for that too as well. That can just kind of give you insight on maybe some judgments that weren't necessarily, or any complaints that weren't brought to judgment that were actually filed, but don't show up on the typical background check. That's given us.
Yeah, if I may interrupt you there. And Andrew, jump in anytime, especially if for some reason we're going to file fair housing and stuff, because we want to be responsible members. I think I learned from it, and one of the best things you can do as a property owner is join the Vermont Landlord Association for their advocacy. I think it was Vermont Landlords that taught me years ago that I think 6-7 years ago, the Vermont court system stopped reporting, I think, some evictions to credit bureaus.
So what, well, and that may be changing. So Vermont has only recently gone to an electronic court database system. So if you haven't checked out the new system, I would recommend that you do. It's free. It's pretty easy to navigate. And it has listings of all of the civil cases going back quite a number of years. So I think we'll see an increase in reporting now that that's in a more virtual format, because what had to happen previously was the credit reporting agencies had to physically send a person to each of the 14 counties to pull records, to make copies, to then take them back and upload them into the system to have judgments go on credit reports. So it was a pretty burdensome process, and it took a lot of time.
And the way I found out the hard way is I was at an eviction with the sheriff. We gave the guy 45 minutes or so to pack his bags. And he said, "I'm surprised you rented to me." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We were evicted 3 months before you rented to us." And when I went through the process, and that was a fail forward, we had done all the traditional searches.
Yep.
So I strongly recommend you guys take note of what Dan just said, because that court search is invariable. I think as well too, Dan, before you were in the position in Jackson, we came across somebody who played with pipe bombs when they were 16. And you wouldn't have seen that on their credit bureaus. but we saw it in the court search. Now that person, I played with firecrackers. I'm not saying they're a bad person, but these additional layers I think are absolutely huge. If I've learned anything, and this is going to sound a little bit harsh, most of you know on this know I'm not, is that every time my heartstrings are pulled as a property manager, that's probably when I need to be really cautious. So Dan, what about like social media, Google, Facebook, and Angela, if you've got any comments on that, because you can certainly see a lot from Google and social media as well.
Yeah, Facebook is huge. Surprising the things that people will put out on Facebook as far as like illegal activity and things like that. So that's a great source. I mean, you can, Vermont's a small state, you can find people pretty easily. Number one being Facebook. So that's one of our initial search items too. A simple Google search will tell you a lot of times. That's definitely part of it. Social media, Google, and then going into the actual background check and everything after that. But no, that's shed a lot of light a lot of times on people's applications. So that's a great one.
I would just echo the Google search. You will find a very large number of lot of information that you wouldn't otherwise find.
Yeah, and Angela, any concerns so that we can balance being great stewards of our properties and respect for housing? Any concerns from your perspective or best practices if you're going to use social media or Google other than to comply with fair housing?
I mean, I think the compliance with fair housing, but also verify, right? It's one thing to read a newspaper article that, there was maybe an allegation or an arrest, but do some follow-up. Go find that court record, find out what happened. It's may not be as cut and dried as what you have seen on the news reporting. News reporting may not be accurate. What it does is it gives you a starting place to dig for more information. So I wouldn't necessarily stop at that, be like, oh, I found you on Google, so I'm not renting to you. But just, it gives you a path forward to find some more information.
Dan, what if anything else comes to mind in tenant selection? With references, do you stop with those references or do you ask the references for additional references?
Sometimes it stops there. Most of the time it stops there with like a landlord reference from there. So that's kind of the only relationship they have with them. A lot of times something you hear when you have a landlord reference is say, if I remember them, it's probably not a good thing. So that's always a funny joke, but and then you could just kind of go into verifying what they put on their application is correct. That's very important. Make sure that you got accurate information on your end, and they can help you verify a lot of that stuff. From the dates they rented, the amounts they rented for. But other than that, I mean, we do go into personal references as well. Those ones can be, not always great because it's probably a relative or a friend that's going to say great things about anybody. But, we just kind of try to verify that. That way, they have support in a community, maybe around Vermont. That can be beneficial in some ways to help success. Maybe they're moving back to be closer with them. You can just find out a little bit more about your tenants and who they are as people when you do that sort of thing. So I think tenants appreciate that when you talk to them on that personal level too.
And as far as, move-in procedures, because I'm as guilty as probably anybody else who, when I was self-managing, move them in quickly, get them in, get it pretty good. Talk to us about, checklists, and stuff like that. What do you recommend? How involved do you get to make sure that we reasonably don't try to get a new tenant to pay for a former tenant's damage, and also reasonably not be told, oh, that was there when I moved in?
Just interrupt real quick. Dan, do you want me to advance these slides or?
Yeah, I can talk about this quick first, and then we will. Great. But pictures is really the best thing. That's the number one way. I mean, you can write down an inspection report of anything, but you need to be able to verify it. So I take lots of pictures. If I had one recommendation for tenants and landlords too, if any tenant was to move in, I always tell them, if you see anything, please take a picture of it and send it to me right away. That way, there's no confusion as to who, or if it was there before or not. And then the same thing too, whenever I go in, as soon as it's since COVID, we don't really do in-person move out inspections together anymore. We really just kind of wait and say, okay, once you're all the way out, I'll go through, check it out. And I take pictures of every room and wall, floor, everything like that. So that helps me do my job. That's for sure. And then there's really no arguments or questions as to how the place was when they moved out. So that's my number one thing is pictures over reports too. So
yep.
But yeah, Angela, if you want to go into our next slide, we'll kind of get into just talking about really functions of a property manager. So they really assist you with your investment, your property. Obviously, there's two main functions of kind of what we do: leasing and full service management. Leasing is exactly what it sounds like: finding you a great tenant, taking them all the way from advertising to executing the lease, and collecting applications, screening them, kind of giving our input. Our owners always kind of have final say somewhat, and I try to keep them as involved as possible in the screening process if they want to be, and just kind of on my level of thinking and how I'm coming to the conclusion of, this person that would be a great renter for this place. So we kind of work together with that whole aspect and the leasing. Full service management includes leasing too in most cases, but that really kind of drives into being the day-to-day manager of everything that has to do with your building, being the landlord for you in an aspect. So I always like to say, our owners, you're still the captain of the ship. I just help you steer it. So I think, owners appreciate that whatever level of involvement they want to have, they can have with us. So go to the next slide, please.
As a side note, to any other property manager, one of the things that I think we found helpful is setting some predetermined numbers. So if we get a call and it's less than X, we can engage, make the repairs, and that way, if you're an owner on this call, you've still got some control, just to better respect all parties.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we obviously have contracts with all our owners, but kind of setting primary benchmarks and guidelines for how to proceed. That way, your tenant's not sitting there with a leaky sink or something for a week just because you're waiting on approval. So that will definitely hinder a tenant relationship with you. So if you don't have those kind of things in place. So
well, and just to jump in, I mean, it can be hard for the person who has like the one-off property or maybe just a few units to maintain those relationships with a lot of those contractor vendors. Whereas if your property management team, you either have in-house folks or you have sort of external vendor contracts, and with those vendors, because you have such a high demand at times, right? With a larger number of units comes higher demand. So you can provide a quicker service than somebody that is trying to self-manage.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of build relationships, whether you have a technician in-house or, those more expert plumber, electricians, things like that, in some situations you have to have. We've built long-term relationships with them, and they're give us priority in a lot of ways. So you're, like Angela said, you're not just, the one-off maybe once or twice a year, and you really have an emergency, you need somebody now, and you can't find anybody. That can be a pretty poor situation. So,
Has anybody tried to hire a plumber recently if you don't have an ongoing existing relationship with a plumber? It's almost impossible.
I have 3, so I have to have multiple on speed dial a lot of times in the winter because not everybody's available, even for me. But having even more than one relationship, it's really helped for sure. So I feel like sometimes I'm calling them every week, so they like to hear from me too. So. Yeah, kind of diving back into here a little bit. So one of the main things I guess a manager can help you do is dealing with that day-to-day emergency service, those kind of things. Really doesn't clutter your mind and your time too. Because I mean, everybody wants to have more time to spend with their family and maybe be able to go after another project or something like that. Say your interests have changed and okay, great, I got this building all set up, ready to go. Now it's time for the next one. And it can be really tough to do that when you have an ongoing, day-to-day management of other places. So we've helped a lot of owners kind of expand and get into different markets, different businesses or passions, whatever it is. So another thing too is when the leasing aspect, we rent things all the time. We have a really good pulse on the market itself, mostly in Chittenden County where we're based. So, I talk to owners a lot and say, geez, I'm so under rented right now. I feel like I'm not charging enough. They might have had tenants for a long time, so there could be, great benefits to that. But sometimes I just go in and kind of give them an evaluation of the place and try and help them understand better what, where they're lacking a little bit.
So Dan, have you had properties for rent in the last couple 3-4 months?
No, absolutely.
What kind of volume are you seeing in responses? Because I think this is something that, at the leasing part, landlords may not appreciate fully if you're trying to lease yourself what's happening right now in the market in terms of volume of responses.
Yeah, it's still pretty crazy. I mean, the holiday season always slows down things a little bit, but I have rentals available all the way until June or February 1st. And the sheer volume is still really great. So, I mean, it's really high. Sometimes you just can't get back to everybody, but a couple of things that depend on, number one, where it is, kind of the level of quality, I guess, of the unit too. Like we have single family homes. I mean, if you look right now, there's very far and few between available. So people tend to jump on those very quickly. And that can be extra beneficial, in competition of the market, to landlords, if you can get inundated with responses, but kind of being able to weed through those things.
So that can be an advantage of having a property manager help you navigate that system, is just dealing with sort of the overwhelming number of responses and inquiries that folks are having to field right now when they have apartments for rent.
Exactly. So, I mean, a lot of times it's tough, for someone who doesn't deal with it a lot, because number one, it can be overwhelming just like that. But being able to, say you get somebody, you say, okay, this person's perfect, and then all of a sudden they don't answer you, and then they're gone. So you kind of have to train yourself when you do it a lot to more just kind of move on. It's first come, first serve. I mean, they're going to treat you the same way in the same aspect. If they find a better unit or something, they're going to go for that. So that people can struggle with that and be like, oh, wait, what happened to this person? I thought they were in, and then you haven't responded to these other people, and then all of a sudden you're missing a month of rent, because you thought you had something, but it's never really for sure until they sign. So
We have a question I'd love to ask, but just as a side note, I have a cousin who's going through a separation in Adida, Mass, and they're starting to see multiple offers on rentals. And that meaning like, all right, so you're renting it out for $1,500, I'll pay you $1,600. Then somebody says, no, I'll pay you $1,700. Then, so I don't know. I don't think we've seen that yet. And frankly, as a Vermonter, I sort of hope we don't, but I think there's a chance we may. Dan, if somebody was self-managing, or just wanted to calibrate themselves, we had a question from Brian Pritchard, and thank you, Brian, for the question and the additional context. What steps would you make or suggest that they do to help calibrate to the market? Is it just check, Craigslist, Zillow, apartments.net? Is it get the Section 8 housing list and what they pay?
I would say, typically we pull our rental prices more from experience, but also from actively looking out there just to see what's there, what people are renting for. There's kind of trends you learn over time as to what quality of a unit you can demand, price for, what inclusions are in there for. It is a little bit, I guess, to answer your question, Brian, about formula-based or circumstantial. I think you mean for rental prices, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, is there an average for 2 bedrooms, or is it, my own 2 cents would be, averages, then oddly enough, circumstantial is a second. And Brian, please, thank you for keep typing if this isn't answering it. My interpretation, Dan, would be both. One, checking what the formula is, the average number of 2-bedroom rent in the area or 3-bedroom rent, then with a circumstantial factor based upon condition and location.
Exactly. So, I mean, obviously, like Burlington, for example, there's more desirable sides of the town. You can't just charge blanket formula for anything. Closer to the south end is more desirable. Usually you get a little bit higher rents. North end is a little bit lower. But then, so you can sort of have a formula, but you got to be flexible in the circumstances and the quality of the inclusions, things like that. So there's more than one layer. It's not a simple formula to answer your question.
Makes sense. We also had a question. Do you manage Airbnb or short-term rentals such as traveling nurses 1 to 3 months?
Yes. We don't get typically into the vacation rental sort of thing, the weekend or week, something like that. We do, however, manage a few right now that are short term. Normally they're about 2 to 6 months. It's kind of what we consider short term, but those can be beneficial in a number of ways, really, because you're kind of getting that premium rent status and income, but on the other side, you are dealing with a little bit higher frequency of turnovers, the potential. Usually you have to include things like utilities and furniture with those short-term rentals. So there's a lot of variables that can go wrong. But I've seen them be successful over the years for sure. And some owners prefer, that model. So yeah.
One other tactic that comes to mind, and Angela, please tell me if this is, not advised, is when I was more involved in the management, I would do a few things. If I was, my heartstrings were getting pulled, I would do a shorter lease, maybe change it to not an auto renewal. The other thing would do too, when the market was when I was self-managing years ago, and like now the market was really hot, I would also occasionally do 6 months leases as opposed to 1 year or 1 years with auto rolling, so that I could have the opportunity, if I wanted to raise the rent more frequently. Now with humor, anybody knows me knows this saying, pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered. Meaning that if you're just jacking rents, it's going to come back to you in the sense you're going to get tenants who try to pay more than tenants who are balanced between paying well and being great community members. But Angela, do you have any thoughts on tactics like that? Or
yeah, I would be careful, because anytime you start offering different terms to different people, you could run into fair housing issues, and you could run into it inadvertently. So just, the biggest thing is just to be consistent with whatever your practices are. So if you were going to make a switch like that, have that switch be across the board, just not on like sort of a case by case basis, because that's where you run into those fair housing problems.
And that's why I'm a member of the Vermont Landlords Association.
And why you have Dan managing your properties now.
Yeah. So, we don't typically do those types of things. If I could think of an example, it would just be somebody that might not have.
I was going to say, or if I could just say, the number of times as an attorney representing landlords, I have heard I made an exception. Mm-hmm. And then they end up with a problem, either an eviction problem or a fair housing problem. It's that making of an exception to existing protocols or process where people run into problems. So get your system set, follow it. The rules are the rules. And that's what will help protect you.
I think that's a great point. And it's almost as if you have to have less heart as you grow, because with humor, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And things like which I'm sure we'll get to, later today, any updates on Burlington Housing, let's get to it. The initiatives like Burlington's doing is actually, I think, making landlords be more stringent, because of the long-term effect, but that's a whole nother topic. Dan, what else comes to mind that you think either self-managers, property managers, or property managers can do their clients to make sure that people have smooth transitions, smooth ownership, and balance optimizing their asset while being a good steward of the community?
Yeah, let's hit the next slide there. I think that's going to kind of lead into this. So, what do we got? All right. So, kind of some things I would say self-managers may struggle with or not know about in general. It's just kind of the state and local compliances of some units, of rental units. It changes based off the town. There's no general code enforcement for the state of Vermont. It's kind of city by city and everything. So city or town. So Burlington and Winooski are probably the two more stringent places. There's things like, the only real statewide one is EMP compliance, which I think everybody's pretty familiar with, but it's lead paint protection for your tenants, things you're obligated to do as a landlord. There's countless times I've talked to landlords and they don't know what an EMP is. So that can get you in hot water really quick. If you don't have those connections or you're not certified yourself to inspect and report and correct those items, you can get yourself in trouble quickly. Other things that Winooski focuses heavily on is fire safety. A lot of times they do annual inspections, some buildings, but we kind of preemptively go through and try and help our landlords stay compliant, not only for safety of the tenants, but for insurance reasons in case something ever happens. We go through, we just look for obvious things. For example, like linked together extension cords, the smoke detectors taken down or covered. Funny things tenants like to do. But yeah, we go through and just make sure everything's up to date. So none of them are reach the end of their life. You're required to put a new fire extinguisher with a fresh tag every year, just so they make sure it works if they ever needed it in an emergency. And one layer deep we go to is dryer vents. We clean a lot of those ourselves. That's kind of the number one cause for house fires, especially in the wintertime. And then Angela, do you want to talk about our renter rebate stuff?
Sure. So many of you are hopefully familiar with the LC 142 form, which is the landlord certificate. And that form is no more. So the entire renters rebate, it's now called the Renters Credit Program. It has been completely overhauled. Landlords are now supposed to be filing their information. It's now an LRC 140 form, but it's set up to be able to file online. And it's set up to be able to file online by property. So landlords and property managers who have a large number of units, their landlord certifications can go from a week long of, almost handwritten forms that you had to do form by form by form. And now you can do sort of a bulk, almost like a bulk dump into the system of the information. The form is no longer given to the tenants. There has been a huge change in how this process works. The tax department, to their credit, has set up a great section of their website explaining it on both the landlord side and the tenant side with videos and written instructions. And it's a pretty clear, but I think it's a pretty beneficial change for a lot of folks and a lot less work for landlords.
Yeah, it's supposed to be easier for both. Really. So before you had to do an individual one for each tenant, and now only one person in the household could actually claim that rebate. So now it's giving tenants more access to the credits, really. So instead it's just the unit in the household, and then based off their income, they can receive the credit themselves, not just the one person in the household.
Right.
And on my end, I mean, we have over 150 tenants that I would have to do these for every year. So that really makes my team happy.
Have you gone through the process yet to put them into the new system?
I haven't yet. We're preparing. Everything's got to be in by the end of this month.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I mean, I was brushing up on it recently, and I received that email back in December about the changes. So I'm pretty excited. It seems like it's really going to be a breeze for the most part.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the systems or the information is going to be saved from sort of year to year. So because it's unit based, so you'll be able to go in and just change what needs to be changed, and everything else stays the same. So
yeah, because before, it would be just a ton of data that we'd have to go through, and just figuring out how much rent they paid throughout the year, how much expenses they've had included, and it's really no more of that. You only have to do that for, I guess, subsidized tenants. Just so that's the only one, and I mean, we have a handful of those, so it should be
simplified the process a lot, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really more on the renter, not like you give the state the information instead of giving them a form, and then they just kind of go through the state when they're filing their taxes, and it's kind of, I guess, benchmark and bracketed based on what credit you'll get for renting.
Right. Yep. Yep. A lot less data the landlord has to provide.
Oh, yeah.
Good thing.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess want to maybe hit the next slide. Oh, that's it.
That's it.
So we had some interesting questions, and a couple of things I made throughout there too is one is, and Brian, thanks, Pritchard, thank you very much for the excellent questions. You had a question about, does it make sense to, how to form LLCs? Candidly, as we're not tax advisors, Angela would probably tell me not to answer that, and I say that with humor. But candidly, to anybody's questions about LLCs, I've formed them, terminated them, reformed them. They're so case specific that in some cases they can make a lot of sense. In other cases, people will opt out of not doing LLCs, but spend an extra few $100 a year to have a multi-million-dollar umbrella from their insurance company. I personally have found there's benefits to both owning them in your own name with that umbrella, as well as occasionally doing LLCs, which will bring into discussions What's your legacy plan? What's your plans over the next few years? Do you have partners? Do you have not partners? It's a little bit of a Rubik's Cube, which is one of the things I love about this business, but it's very complex, but great questions.
So getting
Angela,
back to that, the folks that you would want to talk through that with would be your tax advisor, your insurance agent, your estate planning person, whoever you're working with. If you're not, you probably should be, particularly if you have properties that will need to be handled if you die. So it's sort of a conjunction with that group of professionals to find out what the best approach is for you.
I may add one more thing. I would also talk to your banker.
Yes.
And here's why. So example is, many of you may know this, standard Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac mortgages, which generally have the best interest rates, they're only good for 1 to 4 family properties. It is technically a violation of the note to transfer it to an LLC. Now, I'll neither confirm nor deny if I ever did that, but if I did that, I'll neither confirm nor deny that my note hasn't been called. And I would argue that they probably won't call it because if you're paying it, but that doesn't mean that they won't. Then the other thing is, do you pull buildings into an LLC? Then if you go through refinances, it may make it difficult to get certain rates on refinances. So it's a Rubik's Cube, but it's a great question. Yes. And depending upon the partners involved, you may or may not trigger transfer tax issues. So it is, again, Class A Rubik's Cube, which, I mentioned, Brian, I'd be more than happy to tell you about my situation personally and not advise you, but give you some questions to ask. Angela, what comes to mind end of year, anything else? And Dan, end of things that come to mind as landlords, property managers, or self-managers that we should think about, year end or start of a new year?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is getting that landlord tax filing taken care of. Like most tax forms, you have till the end of January to deal with that. So if you haven't gone out and taken a look at the new system for what you need to put in, now is the time, because you want to give yourself a little buffer in case there's any issues or, the system itself has some challenges. Anytime there's a new program launch, things can maybe not work quite as anticipated. So that's the big one. It's always a good time to talk with your accountant or your other tax professional. Are there things you could do differently, ways to manage cash flow, things that need to be expensed differently? Looking at your year end, are your rents in line with what your expenses are for the year? It's just a good time to do those general reviews and checkups.
Yeah, I would agree. The kind of number one thing is for landlords is those renter credit forms now. There is a link. I don't know if I can type this in anywhere, but if you do want to check it out, I would just Google it. It's just tax.vermont.gov/property/landlord certificates.
If you just Google Vermont Department of Taxes and go to the Department of Taxes homepage, it is like right up on the homepage right now for this new program. So, yeah.
Yeah, and encourage you to share it with your renters too, so they don't have a ton of questions when it comes to the end of this month when they're asking you, where's my landlord rebate for? So I'm willing to bet I'm going to get a few of those still. I have shared that with my tenants, but we'll see.
Well, one thing that comes to mind too is everybody unfortunately probably saw the news in New York City. Space Heater, was there 9 or was it 19? Unfortunately passed. So and so one of the things I asked Dan to do yesterday was to reach out to all our tenants about the extreme cold weather coming in this weekend. First and foremost, think about little things like opening up cabinets where pipes have frozen in the past, so you get circulation in. And that's another great thing about a property manager, because while I was just thinking about, the buildings that I own personally, Dan blasted, 100 tenants, to get, to think about these things. Is it trickling water, and or is it the safe use of space heaters? Because, you guys have probably seen it. Dan sees it all the time. The extension cords that have the Xbox, the 98-inch OLED TV, that heater on it, the air conditioner, the extra freezer, the extra, and they're going to, so I think going into the cold months, we got to worry about our pipes and we got to worry about the safe use of space heaters.
Yeah, it's partly why we do all our fire safety inspections in the winter, because it's more likely when things like that are going to happen. So,
another great tip right there. And we've got about another 10 minutes. So if anybody has any additional questions, again, we want to make this as informative as absolutely possible. And Dan, I really appreciate you sharing your leadership and your models and systems. Angela, any updates on what's happening in Burlington?
Nothing yet. So the bill for the Just Cause charter change is with the House Government Ops Committee. They have not put it on their agenda or their schedule at all yet. They've been primarily focused on town meeting day issues and things related to that. But we are keeping a close eye on that, because that's certainly, if they start taking testimony or looking at that bill, is a time for folks to reach out to start talking, particularly to the members on that committee, but all of the members in your local representative, because ultimately it will have to be voted on in both the full House and the Senate in Vermont. So,
and please, folks, speak up on that, because my big concern is it's going to make it harder to rent to tenants, meaning that I'll take personally, I'm speaking for myself, not for Strong Will or Vermont Apartment Owners or KW. If I was self-managing, I'd be much more stringent. I'd probably let less of my heartstrings get pulled. And the other concern is, if it passes in Burlington, I'd be surprised if you don't see it in Barre, Rutland, Montpelier. And we all know that if you get somebody who's either a very violent criminal or, just refuses to pay, it's not easy to evict them, but there's methods to do that expeditiously. But it's that tenant who causes issues with others or short-term traffic you can't put a finger to, that cause other tenants to leave the building. Right. And under Burlington's thing, it might be hard to get that one rotten apple out. Right.
Someone who's just not a very good neighbor.
Bingo. Any other questions that come to mind? Dan, as you think about it, while we see if there's any other questions that come to mind, is there any other ahas or epiphanies that you've had while managing so many units that you think is something we should share to help everybody further their goals?
I guess the number one thing is, I've been in situations as a property owner myself, is when renting, being patient. When money's on the line, it's really hard to. But I would stress patience over anything. When renting to someone. Going through the process, making sure you're checking everything, because if you don't have a procedure, you will more likely miss something that will seem glaringly obvious, down the road. Like, God, how did I not realize that? Or why didn't I Google search this person? I just missed this one step. So I've been in that situation before. It's not fun. And then you got to scramble and really be as smart as possible to try to recover your investment in some way. So I would preach patience, that's for sure. Looks like we have a couple questions coming in.
Yeah, I know. And with humor, I usually tell people who are thinking about buying properties, if a tenant tells you to go blank yourself, do you pick up a baseball bat or do you call Angela? And if the answer is you pick up a baseball bat, don't buy an apartment building, or at least buy one and get a property manager. Because when it's your house, it is definitely, it's hard not to get upset. But a couple things. I want to thank everybody's attendance, but Nate Otis, remove all garbage disposals. Interesting one. I could see the value of that. But you did just trigger something. I personally would be very careful, whether it's a single family home or a multi-family home, about fireplaces and wood stoves. Yeah. I would also, somebody else triggered something. We just went through insurance changes, and we bulked up on our insurance as a property management company, just to think about actions unintendedly. Otherwise, we make a well-intended exception and then it comes back, we violated fair housing. So we're just bulking up on some of that stuff because it's a different normal right now.
And Brian, I do believe that there are more and more insurance companies that are offering a rider for fair housing and fair housing type claims. So, for folks, if you're, again, that, year end, take a look at your policy, reach out to your insurance agent, find out if the company you're with would offer some sort of coverage for those types of claims. And if they don't, maybe have them shop it around to find one that does. So we are seeing more and more fair housing type claims being made here in Vermont.
Absolutely. We had another great question from Brian Pritchard. Thank you very much for all your questions today, Brian. Tiny homes. Dan, have you ever rented out any tiny homes? I got a comment about zoning in a second on tiny homes, but Dan, have you ever rented tiny homes?
You know, I haven't. I have heard of people renting them for sure. I've looked into one or two about potentially renting them out for somebody. But no, I really haven't rented out a tiny home. I've rented out a small single family home, but no, I haven't.
Well, as everybody, that's a fast, I think another fast evolving, or maybe not fast, but it's an evolving discussion, because I know a lot of people have done them not only for their own joy, but done them for extra Airbnb. And, and I've just started to see articles where certain municipalities or associations, are starting to look at that and either prohibit them or restrict them. So if anybody's thinking about doing a tiny home rental, I would definitely double check with your municipality, or risk accordingly if you decide not to check with your municipality and or your homeowners association if you live in a neighborhood that has an association.
Right. Well, and I think there was a suggestion here about creating a tiny home development or community. That's an interesting look. Again, that would be a zoning question. Many municipalities allow PUDs, with planned unit development. So something like a tiny home development as a PUD could be a very interesting development opportunity. Or if there's no zoning, then you don't really have that issue. But I think there's definitely some space there for people to be creative for getting additional housing units to the market.
Right now, I bet that approach would actually be very welcome. And Dean, if you listen to what Governor Scott's pushing for housing, the Vermont Association of Home Builders, another great sort of, you could say, sister organization, is really putting that, believing that it's all about housing when it relates to economic viability and sustainability for a state that most of us love so very, very much. And if there's no zoning in town, that's probably a great place to start. It's definitely a great place to start. Any other questions from our valued members of the audience, and any other thoughts, Angela, that come to mind for you?
I mean, I think my biggest takeaway, having worked with landlords for almost 2 decades now, I can't believe that it's been that long, is when you're renting properties, take your time and don't ever be afraid of a vacant unit, because making the wrong choice is far worse than having an open and unrented unit.
I would second that. And that's where, this is a personal opinion, not a professional one. I think when I was self-managing, there was a point where I owned 1 or 2 buildings where I could handle them. It was an extra job, some weeks 0 hours, other weeks 15 hours, but somewhere around 3 or 4, maybe if I put it into units, somewhere around 4 and beyond, it became a significant second job. Now, my first wife, rest her soul, wanted to sell them many times because we did shorter mortgages. But I think most people know this. It's a long-term game, or for most of us, it's a long-term game. But that being said, having been a landlord for just under 30 years, I can assure you, with the right models, the right systems, the right partners like the Vermont Apartment Owners Association, and the right teams such as Dan and the amount of techs and plumbers and electricians we work with, they can make it pretty easy, almost to the point of truly being passive with the right team and the right systems. And that being said, it's 12:59. I can't stress enough, first and foremost, Dan, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. We really, really appreciate it. Angela, thank you to you and the Vermont Apartment Owners Association for all you do to advocate to us or for us. And again, my name is Brian Armstrong, CEO of KW Vermont, Strongwell Property Management with Dan and Strongwell Real Estate Team at KW. Check us out at all Burlington Homes, and more so than other, look for our next one, because we try to bring you guys value each and every month so you can get out there and provide for your family and be a great steward of the community.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.